Good morning, good morning. My name is Rosie Eora, many of you from New Zealand. I can see some people I know zooming in the room. Very lovely to see you. We're just going to wait maybe one more minute to get started. Hey, Alex, lovely to see you there. Been a while. Coming to your land shortly in June. Should connect with you. We should hook up. Michael, good morning. Kevin, I know you. I've met you before. Hello, Ruth. Hello, good morning. Richard. Oh, all these faces I know. And if I don't know you, welcome. We'll hand over to our welcome in a moment.
Okay, should we kick off, Rosie?
I think so. I think we could perhaps before we kick off, I'll hand over to you, maybe in the chat, because we are going to be using the chat today. Perhaps we just get a little bit energized because webinars are a little bit, one directional at times, but not this one. In the chat, let me know how you're feeling this morning. Give me a word. This is a feeling of excitement, apprehension, exhaustion. What is the word that describes how you're feeling right now this morning? Pop it in the chat for me. Love to know what that word is. My word is excited. You will notice I'll be excited and I might talk too fast. If that is what is happening, please tell me to slow down. When I get excited, I start to chat a little bit quickly. So we've got lots of different words. Caffeinated. Love it, Gabby. I am somewhat caffeinated this morning. Okay, I'll hand over to Andrea to kick off the session.
Fantastic. Kia ora and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's session on adaptive leadership and whole brain thinking. I am Andrea Matthews, Business Manager for Herman in New Zealand, and with me today are our guest speaker, Cathy Wilson-Fry, and of course, our vivacious Director of Leading for Herman Asia, Rosamy Hart, also known as Rosie. So a quick overview of the agenda for today. We're going to start by looking at some research insights around adaptive leadership. Cathy is then going to share her research and initial findings around adaptation to change. And Rosie is then going to take us through thinking agility and how whole brain thinking helps with navigating complexity. So the format of today's session is interactive, and we've got a great turnout today, which is fantastic. So as Rosie said earlier, please use the chat function if you do have any questions along the way. And if we don't get to them during the session, we will get to them hopefully at the end during the Q&A section. Okay, so what is adaptive leadership? And while looking into this, the definitions of adaptive leadership vary based on context. However, there are three key elements that underpin them all. It's a leadership approach for navigating complexity and change. It emphasizes flexibility, openness, and innovation over rigid planning. And the core mechanism is to build capacity at all levels of the organization to enable personnel to respond confidently in uncertain conditions. So recent studies from 2024 to 2025, and we'll look at some of those in a minute, continue to show that adaptive leadership is linked with improved organizational resilience, innovation, and employee engagement. Research has emphasized its growing relevance in post-pandemic recovery, digital transformation, and hybrid work environments. Some of the most impactful findings include Adaptive leaders outperform in volatile and ambiguous situations. Emotional intelligence and cognitive flexibility are critical enablers. And organizational cultures that support learning and feedback loops tend to develop more adaptive leaders. So let's look at a summary of some of the sector-specific examples next. Research published in the MDPI in 2024 covered a systematic review of 33 studies. And the key highlights of this research found that essential traits for adaptive leaders included flexibility, emotional intelligence, and critical thinking. It also found that these traits are not fixed. They can be developed with the right mindset and organizational support systems. And cross-functional and cross-sectional teams were critical to success. So here's a look at some research out of India which focused on Indian higher education institutions. And higher education has faced immense disruption globally and certainly here in New Zealand, from shifting student needs to funding volatility. And the research showed that adaptive leadership helps institutions in this context navigate these changes through collaborative decision-making, inclusive leadership, and agile planning. The research showed increased resilience and innovation when adaptive practices were in place in these institutions. So again, those key enablers were collaboration, flexible decision-making, and inclusive leadership. But some of the challenges that the research highlighted were innovation bottlenecks and communication gaps. And for those of you wondering, I will share the links to this research with you at the end, and we'll email them across as well. More surprisingly, the military, who are traditionally known for structure and hierarchy, are also increasingly embracing adaptive leadership. Leaders are trained to think beyond rigid command structures, especially in unpredictable combat and peacekeeping scenarios. Adaptive leadership fosters decentralized decision-making and prepares personnel for complex missions. The key emphasis in this context is on initiative, self-awareness, and continuous learning, and the intent being to prepare leaders for complex future roles. Olaf Groth, some of you might be familiar with him, is a strategist and global futurist, and his work emphasizes foresight and the strategic implications of exponential change. He ties adaptive leadership to digital transformation, geopolitics, and innovation ecosystems. And his perspective is useful in helping us understand the macro context in which adaptive leadership is now a necessity, not a luxury. So in summary, adaptive leadership seems to be essential for navigating complexity. It's backed by research across different sectors. The key is flexibility in mindset, not just skill set. So this leads us to the question, how do we enable adaptive thinking at scale in organizations? So here's a overview or links of the research, if for anyone that's interested in the in-depth research, and there is plenty out there. I'm going to hand over to Cathy Wilson-Fry at this point to introduce herself and talk us through her research on empowering adaptation to change. So Cathy, over to you.
Thanks, Andrea, and kia ora, e te whānau, no tamaki makoto aho, ko Cathy Wilson-Fry toko ingoa. So I'm Cathy, I'm based in Auckland and just delighted to be joining with you on the call today. What I'll be talking about is linked to what Andrea has just taken us through, but it's a little bit different because it's got a very much a personal context, and it has occurred in our New Zealand context for those of us joining in New Zealand today. There's a saying that you might have heard that when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. My take on that saying is when you're in a perfect storm of change, make an adaptability toolkit. And that's what I'm here to talk about with you today. And so I'm sharing this research. And I actually gave my mum a quick review of it on Mother's Day, which for us was a couple of days ago. And she said, "That's lovely, dear," which I was delighted about. But she said, "What is the group going to get out of it? Why are you sharing it with them at this time?" And I thought, Mum, that's a great question. And a couple of days ago, I wasn't too sure. So I'll try this out with you now. But I think as an individual, this next piece that I'm going to share with you might be a bit of an opportunity to think about the habits that you already have that make you adaptable, but an opportunity to reflect if there's any more that you might want to put in your personal toolkit. And if you're joining this as a bit of a professional, you might be in the organisational development or people and culture space, or you might help groups of people change. It's a chance to reflect on how we empower people to adapt, and it might remind you of some things that you already know, and it might give us a bit of an opportunity to highlight some new areas for us. So in the research today, in the share today, we're going to cover why the research was undertaken, the types of activities, how it was conducted, and who was involved, just so that you've got a bit of context. I'll share some reflections over the 8-month journey, and while I do that, I'll encourage you to actually reflect yourself on the topic, and you can add your reflections into the chat, and I'm going to go back and read them, and I hope that will strengthen the research. We're going to talk about 6 themes that have come out, and that's particularly helpful for those who are helping others to adapt and change. And then we'll look at an adaptability framework, but it is a caution, it is a work in progress. It's got fresh ink on it, and I'll probably be in the detail of it a little bit. So if I get caught up in the weeds in any part of this conversation, I'll ask for forgiveness in advance, and for you to keep, as you hear things or listen to things, you'll need to make that connection yourself of how does this relate to your context. So I might not sign that post enough that for you, so I'm going to ask you to do that as we go, and we'll finish up with some outcomes and steps. So Rosie, we can click on to the next page. I'm going to start with talking about the why behind this research. So in January 23, I was experiencing a perfect storm of change, and I found out that I needed to put some more adaptability tools in my personal toolkit and to help the people around me that I was working with. But my interest in adaptability actually started when I was at high school. So I got really involved in studying human evolution. I was deeply curious about that, biology and psychology. And I continued that interest when I did a Master of Health Science, and I did research around how do you help people shift behaviour in our workplaces. And I really kept deepening that interest around adaptability in my career as an organisational development professional. So for 20 years, I've been experimenting with things like organisational change and culture shift, leadership and learning. But in January 23, I was noticing some things that were driving us to a need to adapt faster. So the first of these was around ageing and wellbeing. That's my mum in the photo there. And I also have teenagers, kids at home. So I had that whole lifespan kind of in front of me, and I saw all the adaptations that my kids were making, that I was making, that my mum was making. So we have to keep adapting to change through our life. And obviously we've all come through COVID, where there was a big focus on wellbeing, and I noticed an increasing concern around mental health, in that sense that we had to keep adapting just to stay healthy. The second thing that I'm noticing that was really driving this need to adapt to change was around community cohesion. So that's a photo. I was about 10 years old in that photo at Marae, and that's my cousin's koro, and he was explaining to me about the cultural significance of that beautiful panel that we can see. But I noticed as an older person that I was hearing more sort of pulling apart or polarising of views in New Zealand, where tolerance was being eroded, and that's something that we were having to adapt to or shape. Another big trend coming through has been around technology and tools, and an increasing use of technology like artificial intelligence and the impact of that on our work and home lives. The last area around adapting is also our natural environments. That's been something that's affecting a lot of us. And I've got a really personal share about that as well. But before I get to that, I kind of was in this place in January 23 where I'd had a lifelong focus on adaptability. I had a lot of lived experience. I've lived in multiple countries. I've been a parent. I have a range of interests. And I was in a space where I thought I was very adaptable. But on a dark and stormy night in January 23, I realized that I had a lot more to learn about adaptability. When I drove home and I found that we had about 50 truckloads of dirt had come down in a landslip onto our property from a neighbour up the hill. And very quickly, I had to start adapting to the loss of things like our sewage system, the loss of the use of our driveway, 2 of our kids' cars being crushed in the landslip. I suffered a personal injury doing some storm repairs. Meanwhile, the rest of my life kept carrying on, and I was involved in some really demanding work that had deadlines that kept changing, and the nature of the work kept changing. And on top of that, I was involved in about 15 months of organisational restructures through a 20-month period over 2 different organisations. And all of that came together. I noticed that I needed to adapt faster. But also, when I was observing the people around me, I found that they were in distress, that there was overload, and for some of them, they were even tipping over into burnout. And that was starting to have impacts on our communities as well. And so the research that I started 8 months ago started looking at this question. And Rosie, if you could bring that one up for us. So on the premise that we in the world are continually changing, my question was, and it's a long one, so I'll read it out. What are the practical ways we can empower diverse groups of people to keep building their capability to adapt and leverage new technology for well-being and thriving organisations and communities? So since then, I've been involved in a whole lot of activities under a banner of social research, and there's been about 150 activities I've taken part in New Zealand, and I've listed some of these out before, but some of the bulky ones would be sort of 60 conversations. I've read 30 books. I've gone to conferences, interviews, workshops. I've used AI tools. I've done yoga, dancing, time in nature. I've experimented with anything that might help us answer that question over on the right-hand side. The process that I used has been about doing an activity, reflecting, generating some insights and using that to weave into tools. And that's something that any of us could be doing at any stage. So I encourage you to have fun with this yourselves. The people that I've been fortunate to talk to have ranged in age from 19 to 90. They've come from really different diverse cultures and backgrounds and life experiences, and some of them are listed here. If any of them happen to be on the call today, thank you very much for the generosity that you've shown me in answering my endless questions about adaptability and what's been useful for you. And I'm delighted that I've got this opportunity to share back. What I'll share with you coming up is based on this input from a wide range of people and sources, but it has been filtered through my own personal experiences, so it comes with, that bias woven into it. All right, so we're going to move into the reflection space. And if you remember, this is this opportunity for you to keep reflecting about adapting to change in your own personal views and experiences. And you can pop those in the chat as we go along. So these were key reflections as I went through the different months answering that question that we just looked at before. And in September, my reflection was that we have a whole lot of organisational change going on in lots of organisations in New Zealand and around the world, but it's reducing performance and value. There's value loss for shareholders. There's links to anxiety, overload and burnout for people. So it's a bit of a murky place to be. In October, this idea kept coming up that for some people, there's really big barriers to adapting, and some of that's around their current capability levels. They might have had a lower level of capability to start with, or they may have had a whole lot of fear to overcome. And one of the big ones was around AI and automation and how that would impact their lives. But I got a bit more optimistic in November. So there was this idea that we can help people adapt, both with new and existing wisdoms and frameworks and tools, including AI. And I had a lovely experience with the Art of Living program in November. I went to their conference where they shared with me wisdom from 5,000 years of study on how you help people adapt. And I have, again, taken those wisdoms and tried to turn that into the habits that I bring into my everyday life. Looking into December, there was some reflection that the approaches that we share with people need to be super practical and accessible for really diverse groups. And so I purposely tried to use activities that had low or no cost, using very basic technology. I stole my son's old work computer. I used an old phone. I used all the free versions of AI softwares. I went to community libraries and I tried to use tools that anybody could access. Then into January, there was this reflection around when you are adapting to change, you need to make a connection between what's happening with you personally, but also what's happening at an organisation or level, whatever organisation you're in, but also consider the society around you. February had the reflection around that as you adapt as a group, you still need to take into account the very diverse individual perspectives of the people that you're asking to adapt. And moving into March, it was a real experience that I had around the amount of safety that people need to have when you're asking them to adapt when there's deep personal change going on for them, and to not underestimate this. So you have to do that adaptation with a great amount of care and support. And lastly, in April, that as you make adaptations for yourself as an individual, whether it's as in life in general or as a leader, that you actually be very conscious of how that then impacts on every relationship you have, and you actually need to adjust those relationships as well. So I'll pause there for a moment. I'm not sure if we've had any reflections come through in the chat at this stage. I'll ask my helpful friends.
No reflections yet, but very
not yet.
Not yet. But, if anyone would like to share, I've been connecting the dots as you speak, Cathy. Very interesting to contextualize adapting to your own context. So I'm not sure if anyone happy to share a story, but I can also share it at the end if you'd like to move.
Yeah. I think I'll just invite the group again. If any of this bubbles away for you, or if you've got something really different that you want to add in, again, feel free to pop that in the chat. That'll be really helpful when we go back and look at this. But I think we can probably move on through to the insights. So this was a little interesting activity that I did partway through the research, and I think it was in December, about 3 months. I had 3 or 4 months worth of data, and I collected it all and I put it in AI tools. I tested out a range of AI tools, and I gave it the research question, and I asked it to summarize all the data that had gone in. And then I took the data out of all the AI tools and I summarized that again using another AI tool to squeeze it down to the 6 themes that we're going to show in a moment. As I bring up the 6 themes, have a look at them, because we're going to ask you a question about which of these themes seems most important to you. And this is kind of almost that context of you helping others to adapt. And there might be some technical words in here, so I apologize for those in advance. But the summary idea was that empowering people to adapt requires a holistic, inclusive, and systemic approach, combining leadership, technology, well-being, and shared learning to drive sustainable success. And Rosie, that first theme was around people-centered change, tapping into stories, shared wisdom, and really balancing uncertainty that people go through, but keeping them connected with purpose. The next theme coming up was around holistic well-being, and that was seen to be a very underpinning, it was almost like a vaccination. If you can keep people vaccinated with well-being, then that will get them through the challenges of adapting. bringing up the next one was around adaptive leadership, and that's why we're all on the call today. So I think there's no need to dive into that one, but there was a sense from the research around needing to align people and use tools to help them make shifts through change. Another one of my favourites there around we need to build adaptive cultures. So you can't just expect people to adapt on their own if you've got a big group of people that you want to shift and become more adaptable. There's things that you can do to embed it into the systems that they experience and the values that you pull from. These values came out of some research that was shared by Stanford. They talked about promoting values of openness to change, experimentation, collaboration, and learning. So if you're involved in culture shift in your organisation, I'd kind of highlight those ones. Skipping on to the next one, leveraging AI and technology. You've got to give AI credit. It did put people-centered change at the top, and it left leveraging AI and tech to the 5th out of 6 themes. So I thought it was pretty generous of AI. But it has been for me over the 8 months, I've really experimented with all the different AI tools that I can get my hands on, and just dived in and given it a go and see how can it help with us. And I've done this activity with my mum. So she's losing her vision. And so we're teaching her how to use her AI tools more so that AI can do things to make her independent living better. And so she's adapting, but using AI to help her do that. And we bring up that last theme around systems thinking. So everything's connected. All right, I'll pause there for a moment, and hopefully you've had a chance to get your head around what the 6 themes are. And Rosie, are we at a stage where we can do the poll?
We are. So hopefully launched just then is those themes that Cathy just spoke to. And her question is, which theme about empowering people to adapt is more important to you? So I'll give you a little minute to respond to that. You can select the one, and then I will share the poll, and we'll see what the thinking of the group looks like. There was a question in the chat, Cathy, about did you find particular links between thinking preference and adaptive leadership? You might want to ponder that and either answer it now, or we can come back to it in the Q&A at the end. So a good question.
It's an awesome one. And so the high level answer is yes, I did. But I reckon the group will have some chance to do some sharing themselves, and then I'll come back and answer that in the Q&A. I can build on that, the work that the group does.
That's awesome. Well, we have hit the 84% participated mark, which is always good for me because I go with the 80-20 rule. Like 80 of you are present, 20 of you probably could be driving and therefore can't connect with a poll right now. So I'm going to end the poll. Oh my gosh, we're up to 92%. Look at you guys smash that out. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 92% is an awesome completion rate. So hopefully now someone give me a thumbs up, someone like Alex Perlman, because I can see your face right now.
Yes.
Okay, Cathy, you can see the poll there.
I can.
I'll let you talk to that, Cathy, if you like.
Okay, so we've got people-centered change at 43% is the biggest. I think then we're looking at adaptive leadership, 23% second, building adaptive cultures, 21% third, and holistic wellbeing, 9%, followed by equal fifth, leveraging AI and tech and systems thinking. Awesome. Thank you for sharing all your insights. Really appreciate that.
I'm just going to take a screenshot of that because I tend to forget about it. And if we need to share that with you, if you guys are curious later, we can come back to that. I always forget to share the polls. People are interested in that after the fact.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So as we're shifting now from sort of thinking about this, about how we empower others to adapt, and we're bringing up this idea of how we might adapt either as an individual or a leader. And yeah, Rosie, bring us on to the next page. So this is the part of the presentation where there's a lot of detail on the page. So I'm going to step us through that in a couple of blocks to keep help us do that with a smile on our face. And again, the idea behind this adaptability framework is it's a collection of information, some of which you probably already know. So this is a chance for you to go, oh, yes, I do that already. And consider, you can ask yourself, oh, do I need to keep doing that now, given my context and circumstances? or do I need to experiment because I actually have to do things a bit differently now? I also want to introduce this framework by saying it needs to be used with care. So remember back when I was that reflection from September, when we were saying that there's a whole lot of people that were in distress, that they were anxious and that they were tipping towards burnout. You can't just whack something on them and say, hey, just become more adaptable overnight. You have to take care of people where they're at, and sometimes people need stability. So Rosie, if we take away the first part, when we think about stability, it is necessary and useful for us, and it turns up in human societies. You know, yes, we've got lots of evolution and adaptability, but we also have elements that are stable. And so it's just being conscious of that and which of them are necessary for a person or your own context. If we do another click forward, Rosie, and look at adaptability, this is where, because of the topic that we're covering today, we're going to focus on this side a bit more, but we're not going to forget the stability side. And now again, there's things in this framework I need to call out people like Carol Dweck and her work on growth mindset, Daniel Kahneman, his work on thinking fast and slow, Otto Scharman and his work on creating generative conversations. They all have contributed unknowingly into this framework. So I do recognise their work on this, and it will show up as a reference a little bit later on. As you scan this list, the capabilities that you might need to adapt have been broken into mindsets, behaviours, and knowledge and skills. That's just a format that I find helpful for me to, you know, when I'm considering when I might need to become more capable for something. But you will have whatever methods suit you. So there's a flavour around mindset, that having a growth mindset helps us adapt. That behaviours like scanning for change, embracing uncertainty, trying new experiences helps us. And again, when I showed you that list of 150 activities that I did, I tried every time someone said, oh, hey, do you want to try X? I'd say yes. Whether I thought I'd like it or not, I tried it, and then I reflected on it, and then I went outside my comfort zone and said, okay, what did I learn from it? There's some reflection as a behaviour that really helps you adapt. But as you go through this list, again, I want you to be thinking what you already do, what's a surprise for you. And you will have an activity, there's going to be a breakout that you will go to, not straight away, but in a short while, and you'll be asked about this a little bit. So keep thinking about this, make a note on the side if you need to. When it comes to knowledge and you want to be using knowledge to help you adapt, it's really helpful to have a systems view, know what's going on around you. Think about emerging opportunities and problems, what's changing and why it's important, and dial down on, you know, work out if refresh yourself on how do you learn best, because there's a lot of learning that goes alongside adapting. And then we get into the skills part of the framework. And again, it talks about the skills of being really learning agile, experimenting, being super self-aware. I was talking this through with my manager yesterday, and he said, oh, look, there's a lot of words on this framework. What parts are the most important? And I said, look, I don't have the answer for you yet. And the group like this and the discussion we're having today will help us work out which bits are more important. But there is something in here around the skill to self-regulate your emotions is an incredibly valuable skill for adapting. Because if you can keep your stress levels low while you go outside your comfort zone and try new things, then your body is going to be healthy while you keep adapting. So that's one of my personal favourites at the moment. So we've talked a lot about capabilities, and I now just want to mention about habits. So Rosie, if we can expose the last part of the framework. I've highlighted that habits and social and structural determinants, which is a really academic term, but just means access to resources and social support. These ones have been highlighted because the research has shown, and it's Albarracin who did the research in 2024, that if you're wanting to shift behaviours, that capabilities are interesting and can help people get things underway, but it doesn't really impact behaviour unless you make it a habit and that people have got ongoing access to resources and social support. So if you took nothing else away from the share of this research, I'd say to you, think about your habits, the ones that help you be adaptable, Are they serving you? Do you need any new habits? And if you just went away with this idea that, oh, I might reflect on my habits and which ones are serving me and which ones I need to let go of, which ones I need to have some more of, that would be a massive step forward for growing your ability to adapt. As I said, you're going to have a breakout room activity on this shortly, but meanwhile, I'm going to wrap up my share about the research activity that we've done. So Rosie, can we go on one more page? Thank you. And so the key outcome for me personally about going through this 8-month research journey has been that I can now adapt faster and easier. I'm building new capabilities. I've got new habits in place. I've got access to resources and support, which I'm hoping that, and I'm sharing those with people around me. I'm hoping that others get to experience that as well. And if I talk about those photos that are showing up on the screen, what you're looking at, the left-hand side photo is a Nico plant. It has survived 825 days in our landslip. The contractors who are taking away the 50 truckloads of dirt from our landslip preserved it and left it standing. It's the only plant standing in that area, and it adapted to those conditions and is thriving. And I hope it continues to do that over the coming many months while we start our repairs. Meanwhile, the beautiful Pohutakawa tree, very tall and lovely, elegant Pohutakawa tree, one of many trees that we lost in the slip, it couldn't adapt to its new conditions. And unfortunately for it, but great for us, is that we will be repurposing it into warmth this winter. And my husband chopped it up the other day, and we will be burning it through winter and appreciating its value. But it's a kind of a bit of a takeaway for me about the adapting is something that we have to do all of the time. As far as next steps, if we can click through to that, Rosemary, I'll be doing some more testing of that adaptability framework that we've just been looking at. So I'm doing some work to help develop some adaptive leaders in an organisation of 1,200 people. And I'm hopeful that we can take the learnings from this and embed that into the leadership development programs that we're building with them. And then, all going well, I've set up to do some testing of it in a smaller community setting. But meanwhile, I'll be very interested in any feedback that you can give me about anything that you might have taken away from today or that you would like to add into it, or if anyone wants to reach out to me. I believe Rosie and Andrea, my email, I think, might go out to the group. So I'm happy to take email connections from people or via LinkedIn. And I think, Rosie, we're going to hand over to the group for the breakout activity.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Cathy. I see some people have to run. That's fine, no problem. We are recording. And the other thing I would say, perhaps to my lovely colleagues, Cathy, maybe you want to put your LinkedIn in the chat right now so people can actually connect with you. If it's triggered something for them, they'd like to have a conversation further, they'd like to connect with that research that you're doing and that research question. I'm trying to diligently change the slides, but I'm also connecting to my own story of adapting in January, which if we have time, I'll share at the end. It wasn't part of it, but it actually really synthesizes what you just shared just then. I've also been pulling together some of the questions that we have in the chat there. So do keep putting those questions in the chat. I'm Rosie. For those who don't know me, I'm the Director of Learning at Herman. Some of you I've had the absolute pleasure of working with, facilitating with. You've attended sessions of mine. And as I said earlier, if I start talking too fast, please let me know, because I get really excited about this type of stuff. I'm going to start, though, by popping you into a breakout. So my lovely Kate, if you could set those breakups, just have them ready in the background. And then I'm going to explain. It's only a 5-minute breakout, and there'll be probably 3 to 4 people in a room. But based on what Cathy's shared, we'd love you to think about what helps you be adaptable, personal reflection. So in a breakout room, you're just going to reflect, on one habit you have, just one example, something that you do that helps you be adaptable. And if you'd like to, if you type it in the chat in your breakouts, please bring it back to the main meeting, because what I'd love to get, this is the toolkit. I mean, why, we don't need to make it up ourselves. We can actually ask 50 people in the room, however many are, and say, what are people doing to create this adaptability toolkit? So bring that habit back to the main chat so we can start to consolidate this for you and pull it together in some format. And we will move on from there. So you've got 5 minutes. Kate, if you'd like to send them into breakouts, that would be awesome.
Okay, opening the rooms now.
Thank you. You should have an alert that says, please join a breakout room. And it's not a long chat, so try and be snappy. I know there's some chatty people in this room. And we'll see you back soon. Welcome back. Thanks to those who have joined us. Come back to the main room. As you join, please pop in the chat. What were the habits? What were the couple of habits that you found powerful? I will keep repeating this as more people join back from the main room. You'll get to hear it a couple of times. And for my lovely assistant, Kate, there in the background, just keep those breakouts connected so they go back to the same rooms in a moment.
Yep.
They've still got 6 seconds and they're going to be zoomed out of the room. Galen, hello, lovely to see you. Been a while. Been a while. Okay, so to those who are coming back into the main room as I speak, I can see you zooming back in. What I would love for you to do is in the chat, share the habit that you may have discussed, or the habits that you may have discussed that you think help you be adaptable. And as you're doing that, I think I'll share mine, and it's just get out of my way. My habit is to kind of stop my natural inclination to overthink everything and to, run away with future focused thinking. It is literally, my habit is just stop. And I was actually talking to Steph before this call. I'm a very big into the meditation and mindful space, and I've been doing some research in that area. And some people, when I mention those 2 words, they actually would like to stab my eyes out because it is a trigger word for them. So unlocking those practices in a way that is powerful, being present, being mindful. And I have a couple of tricks that I use. I've got some other people sharing in here what their habits are, which is amazing. What I want to do, just a quick time check, okie dokie. I want to move on now to talk about the connection between Cathy's amazing research and what she's been noticing and whole brain thinking. So I'm not sure how many of you in the room are familiar with whole brain thinking. This is a webinar that was open to all. So some of you may know a lot about it. Some of you, this is going to be a little a trip down memory lane and a reminder. So when I heard Cathy's work, I kind of saw it as this Venn diagram of mindsets, her behaviors, her knowledge, and her skills. And that was what she was sharing before she wrapped up, that, to be adaptable, you need to have mindset traits and types, particular behaviors, as well as knowledge and skills. And then there's this kind of underlying, like Andrea described it to me as like what's below the iceberg, what's sitting underneath that. And someone, I think it was Elaine, even asked about that. And so I want to propose, this is just proposing, that thinking diversity is potentially a root system which informs your capabilities in these other 4 areas. And thinking, if you're not familiar with it, refers to how we process information, so the processing of our cognition. And I think it really impacts our mindset. So I actually wrote this down because I needed to get it clear in my head. So I want you to think of thinking as the processing of the mind. Mindset is the position or the stance of the mind. So to kind of distinguish those things, which is where the growth mindset stuff fits in. Behavior is the observable result of your thinking. So sometimes you think in a particular way, you can actually observe it in people, and sometimes not. And for those of you who know more about this, you understand why. Thinking also impacts the knowledge we have, the knowledge we seek, the things that we want to know more about. And so too does it impact the skills that we have, because we understand that we think in particular ways. It also informs skills that we seek to develop, skills that take more energy for us, and how we might potentially grow those different areas. So sorry, I get distracted by the chat. I'm going to focus on here. I'll come back to your chat later, even if it's after the session. So what is this thinking lens that I talk to? Well, for those who don't know, it's a model called whole brain thinking, which is a framework and a lens for how our brain thinks or processes information, and it helps individuals understand how they process and perceive their world. So it can provide a map of our cognitive processes, and these processes impact those domains that Cathy was talking about: mindset, behaviors, knowledge, and skills. And if you want a quick recap, we have the 4 different modes of processing, or quadrants of processing: the logical, analytical, fact-based, quantitative thinking. We have in the green quadrant organized, sequential, planned, detailed thinking. In the red quadrant, interpersonal, feeling-based, kinesthetic, emotional. And in the yellow quadrant, holistic, intuitive, integrating, synthesizing. And so when we did the poll earlier, the top element, I think, was connection, people-centered theme as being the most important. Now, in our model, that theme would probably align more to that red quadrant as an example. If I look at these examples of the habits, like I'm just reading it in reverse now, Elaine said, I make a to-do list focused on answering questions. What's the smallest thing I can do right now? Now we can map that habit to the green quadrant. So it's tangible, it's practical, it's sequential, versus my habit of perhaps being mindful, or I guess reconnecting with my my nervous system is probably falling more in that red quadrant, interpersonal space. Kevin says tapping into my boys on a habit of tapping into my boys on technology. So we might see that connecting perhaps in a blue quadrant lens. So what we're doing is we're using this model as a lens to make sense of our world. And it's not as simple as that, but it is a first step. So where does it go next? Well, when we understand these 4 quadrants and how we use them as a lens, we then start to recognize how we prefer to think based on this lens. And so I've given you a snapshot of 3 different examples of thinking profiles that exist in our database. And if I'm to get my little numbers out, I know that the first one on the left there has a tilt towards the left, to the A and the B quadrants, the blue and the green quadrants. And I'm literally just going to read some examples of what this looks like: logical, analytical, technical, planned, organized, implementing, work that it enjoys, accomplishing, analyzing, making things work, building things, establishing order, attending to details. So that was that type of thinking as a preference. And it happens around 18% of time in our database. We have the next one there, which actually represents what we call a quadruple dominant profile, characterized by having a strong preference across all 4 of the quadrants, can often be described as a multi-dominant translator. Sometimes can experience conflicts between quadrants, as in not knowing which quadrant to go to in a particular scenario, because all are very important. Work it enjoys, work that involves variety, diversity, engage multiple different activities and exercises. So that is another example of a thinking preference. And then I've got the one on the right there. Sorry, that last one, that pattern happens around 3% of times in the database. On the right there, we have the one that tilts off into the yellow. This happens around 1.28% of times in the database. This type of thinking is about creative, holistic, imaginative, integrating thinking. It likes to synthesize information. Work it enjoys, taking risks, seeing the big picture, bringing about change, and providing a vision. So we all have our own thinking preference, and some of you know that because you've done the HBDI to identify your thinking preference. My question, though, is which of these profiles do you think is best suited to the conversation around being an adaptive leader? Which profile would we want? The left one, the one in the middle, or the one on the right? I want you to pop it in the chat. Which profile do you think is required to be an adaptable leader? Let's see what comes out. Well, some of you have trained a bit too well. So if you know me, the answer is actually all of them. And this might be a surprise to some of you who are less familiar, with whole brain thinking, this is not a profile of performance. This is a profile of preference. So let me explain why none of these profiles is actually the best profile for adaptability and how we bring whole brain thinking into the conversation of adaptability. So let's move on. This is you, the leader, the person leading the ship, driving the ship. Now, the first thing to think about is you have a thinking preference. Each of us do, and it can change over time. So life events can shift this over time, but you have a particular way of thinking, and it is your preference. It is what is comfortable, natural to you. It often drives and motivates you to do particular things in particular ways. It's good to know, but it's not the end of the story, because you actually lead a whole lot of people who also have thinking preferences, and they can be similar to you, they can be different to you. And in this piece of the conversation, you need to really understand and contextualize your role. We're moving into now adaptive leadership. So who is it that you lead? And at this point of a conversation on this topic, I have people say, yeah, but I'm not a leader. I just pick up the phone and deal with the customer service calls. I say, well, hang on a second. Who are you actually leading to do what? You're leading customers to understand, I don't know, your product in a way to help them use it for a better outcome. So all of us in particular ways actually lead. Leadership is not a title. Leadership is not a hierarchy. Leadership is a way of operating in the world. And I think when you think about it that way, it gives you a lot more autonomy and choice to consider how you want to lead other people. So in the corporate land, though, because that's where we are today, in the corporate space, you might be leading seniors, middle management, frontline staff, or staff. Similarly, if you're a consultant, you're leading your client towards a change process. And so we all lead in particular ways. What's interesting, though, is you have your preference, you have the preferences of those you lead, and then you have this third thing, which is the job you're actually trying to do. And that can also have a particular pattern about it. So if you are this leader with a preference for holistic creative thinking, and you're leading a senior leadership team who has a preference for analytical, creative, and interpersonal thinking, but they're implementing a new IT system, how do you get them to adapt? And this is where whole brain thinking really helps organizations connect the dots between these steps. Because sometimes as a leader, the thing you need to do is not the thing you prefer to do. So the adaptive leader is the leader who does what? Recognizes themselves and has the self-awareness to understand their preferences. Secondly, understands the people they lead, the WIFM for them, what's in it for me, what drives, what motivates them, what gets them going. And thirdly, they actually recognize the context they're operating within and what they actually have to do to get the job done. And when you bring these three steps together, you start to operate as an adaptive leader. And you start to work in ways that stretch you. There are some caveats here, like, you wouldn't want to be this particular leader leading a particular team, implementing new IT systems all the time. There is a conversation around burnout that could be had. It's not part of today. You can go in there another time if you're curious about it. But in the first instance, this is the way to unlock and reframe these tools and strategies. So back to my question, there isn't actually a profile that is the best profile for adaptability. Because if your profile is this yellow quadrant profile, that's great for thinking things in new and different ways. But what if you actually need to adapt and create stability and create routine and create consistency? That for you is being adaptable. Similar to, I'm just going to jump back here, similar to this square profile. I get people coming on my course like, I want to be a square, I've got to be a square, my profile has to be a square. Now, the thing about having the preference of all four quadrants is that for that thinker, adaptability is thinking in a single way in one quadrant. That is what being adaptable is needed for that thinker. So adaptability is relative to you, your thinking, your context, and it's also about the people and it's about the outcome. So just doing a time check for myself because I want to have another breakout. So just to quickly summarize, what you need to do all that is you need thinking agility. Thinking agility is the ability to consciously adapt, access, and shift your thinking, integrating the different quadrants as the situation demands it. It is not about thinking in one quadrant or this quadrant. It is about the adapting of the thinking based on the situation. And that is what we teach for any of those of you who are out there in whole brain thinking and certified practitioners. That is what you're doing, whether you knew it or not. That's what you're doing with others. So how does this correspond to Cathy's framework? Well, very beautifully, actually, because if you think about your thinking as being that root system, and then you think about your mindset, your thinking impacts your mindset. It impacts your behaviors, what you prefer to do. It impacts your knowledge. It also impacts your skills and your competencies. So what you seek to develop. Like, for example, I run a lot of online facilitation. And do you know in the HBDI, we have this one measure or this word attribute called technical. And you can pick it in the survey. You can pick the word technical. And you know that single word is my lowest word on every survey and report I've ever done. It is the lowest, it is the bottom. But it doesn't mean that I haven't developed competence to facilitate in a technical space, working with technology, embracing technical tools. It's just a preference. And if you get me to do it all day, every day, yes, I'll possibly burn out. But that's what we mean about the connection between these elements. I have some interesting examples of connections to knowledge, skills, mindset, and behaviors. For example, and I'm not sure how much detail to go, but I'm thinking perhaps, and you can put yes in the chat if you'd like me to do this, I'll only do it if you want it, is actually writing up a little blog for you around the connection between these things. And what does it look like? What is an example of a behavior from the 4 quadrants? What is an example? So if you're interested in that, I will spend the time. And you know, AI is going to help me do that. It does a lot of good fact checking of that. But there is a nice synthesis of how Cathy framed it and our ability to drop. Okay, there is enough yeses. We'll do it. We'll do it. It's coming. You might need to wait a little bit, but I think it's powerful. So now we're going to get into the breakout. Just time check. Okay, awesome. I want you to go back into the same breakouts, and we'll have around 10 minutes this time, a little bit longer than the previous one. What you're going to talk to in this breakout is the 4 questions. If you know me, I love things in 4. I love things in blue, green, red, yellow. Can't help it. So who is it that you lead? What do you think of this framework that we've talked about and the connection between whole brain thinking and the framework? What is most critical in your context? This is one thing. What do you need to do to be an adaptive leader? And lastly, why is it important? Sorry, James, I can see you're dipping out of the session. I'm going to answer your question. Oh, you had an awesome question. So do look at the recording. I'm going to come back to that at the end. If you can, I'd love you to capture that discussion and then bring it back to the main room. So I can see some people do have to jump out. We still have another 30 minutes of time together. So we'll pop in the breakout and then we're going to come together and synthesize all this information. Hey, you guys might even inform my my writings of the whatever comes out of it. We could collate it together. So I'm going to pop you back into breakouts. I might do some readjusting because people have dropped off. So just bear with me if you get zoomed in and out of a different room. But I will see you back here soon. Welcome back. Welcome back. We're heading into the last chunk of our webinar today. Thanks for those who have stuck with us. So in the chat, I'd love if you were writing notes in your chat usually comes back to the main chat, but I can't see it. So if you were communicating in the chat, in the breakouts, I don't have visibility. And if you weren't, that's perfectly fine as well. What I would love you to consolidate into the chat though, is some information about any of these questions. It could be the who you lead. I mean, like, let's get honest. I lead my kids to school every morning, and it requires a level of adaptability, getting their shoes on. I mean, it happens across all levels of our life. What is critical for you in the context of adaptability? What do you need to do? And that might have come out in the habits. And why is this important for you today? So if you have a moment, please pop it in the chat. And I am going to use some of that to inform the Q&A. We're about to head into the Q&A, but I'm not going to change my slide until we get to that. So in the chat, what is critical? What do you need to do? Why now? Why today? Deanna, I think I'm saying that right. Hopefully I am saying that right, Deanna. That's a really interesting pick up, that you don't lead a team, but you do lead clients, coaching clients. That's 100% true. You lead them to be the ones adapting and towards that change. And you need your own toolkit for yourself, but also to teach it to them. So I often say that actually Michael said it to me. Is Michael still on the line? Michael's CEO of Herman, and he used this analogy, you know, when I said, I'm not equipped, I don't work in the adaptable leadership space, I'm not equipped to teach this. And he said, well, hang on, but did Tiger Woods's you know, golf coach, was he a master? No, he was the coach. He was the person who helped unlock the skill of his client. And when I put it in that way, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just unlocking the skill within others, whatever that skill is. And there are some really good tools that help you do that these days, particularly with AI. I'm just going to go through the chat to see what some of these themes that have been brought out. Elaine was, and if I pronounce your name correctly, apologies, but Elaine was saying the importance of taking a moment to reset the mindset, yes, and the impact of being adaptive beyond what's in front of you. Hearing the needs and being adaptable to those needs. Yes, Kate, that's so important. Sometimes we actually hear what we think the needs are rather than the actual needs of the person. And so truly understanding what they're asking of you, that's a skill in itself. And we can go in. I've got a workshop on that I run that we can talk to another time. Learning to connect with community, being inclusive, listening, absolutely. Connecting to, you don't have to do this in isolation. And I think that's really important. Focus on what's within your control. Oh, Alison, I love that. The circle of control and influence is a really good point to bring up in this conversation. And you know, the conversation of what we can control. Dino's saying, understand people have different internal processes. Influencing is more important. Identify what's in it for the people. Be non-judgmental. Ah, yes. I haven't mentioned these words today, but the not judging yourself in a moment of adaptability is so important, because the minute you go, I should have, I could have, I didn't, I wanted, then you stop being adaptable and you start focusing on all the problems. So big conversation around that. Need to lead them to finding their own adapting behaviors, is saying Alex. Needs self-awareness. Yes, absolutely. And the ability to interpret clients' needs. Absolutely. Went a bit off topic. Perfectly understandable and acceptable. I'm not judging that at all. Individuals being more adaptable to change if they feel financially sound. Yeah. So what kind of what underlying conditions are needed to happen? What psychological safety conditions need to happen for people to be able to take the risk to adapt in the situation? And sometimes it's forced on you too. Oh, awesome. Good job, team. All right, looking at the time. There were a couple of questions that came out throughout today's session. So I'm just going to touch on them. And if you've got more, please pop them in the chat. But I just want to just kind of go into probably a surface level, just putting it out there. It will be a bit surface level. One of the questions, Cathy, and I'll hand over to you in a minute. I'll answer some others first. But for Cathy was, how much of the adaptive leadership model as theorized by Heifetz, can't pronounce names. We'll give it a go. Have you used to build your framework? So I'll come back to that question in a moment, Cathy. But another question. So Elaine also asked, did you find links between particular thinking preferences and adaptive leadership? So Cathy, you might want to answer that too. The third question was about neurodiversity and neurodivergence, asking, do neurodivergent individuals have a stronger inclinational capacity to adapt, change, and innovation compared to neurotypical audiences? And what I would say about that, because it's a very, very long and deep conversation, and much more complex than I'm going to explain it, but in the space of neurodivergence, if you're not into that area or that way of working, is where your brain actually functions differently to the typical brain. So it fires differently, it's wired differently, it processes in a different way, and the neurological components of your brain differ. And so if you think of things like ADHD, autism, other conditions like that fall into that neurodivergent space. And the one thing that I'll say about neurodivergence and this whole conversation about adaptability is firstly to recognize the framework within which you see divergence. And divergence, in my view, and this is an opinion, falls best within the social model of disability. The social model of disability says people are only disabled because of the social environment that sits around them. And it's a stance that says we actually disable people by putting them in environments which do not allow them to have their brain function, wire, and succeed in a successful way. So there is a big part of the environment that really shows up in this way. And the second thing that I would mention of a neurodivergent audience is that they are often the most adaptable audiences we have in our workplace because they've had to be, because they've had to adapt to the conditions of the society around them. And so they often experience higher levels of burnout because of that adapting. And so, people throw these lines away like, oh, well, people with autism are rigid and they don't like change and they don't like flexibility. But that's actually not the whole story. They prefer consistency and routine, but they actually need to and do adapt and respond to situational changes and demands. So if I was linking this to the neurodivergency conversation, it would be to say that in the neurodivergency world, this audience is actually highly adaptive and they mask a lot. But that we have to recognize what structures have we put in place. Back to Cathy's model, actually, it was the bottom, it was the societal part of that model. What have we actually set up that supports that to help them flourish and that actually gets in the way? So Kevin's saying constantly having to adapt to a neurotypical world every day. It's a really nice way to summarize that. And it starts all the way back, when they go to school. That's where it starts to happen. So that is another passion project of mine, the neurodivergence and diversity space. I'm not going to get much more into it today, but very, very important question to recognize that difference in the way we approach things. I will hand over though to Cathy if you're happy to perhaps answer either of those questions. One about if you wanted to go into more about the link between your frameworks and thinking preference, as well as the question on.
Okay. I'm going to hit the model one first because that's probably the shortest. The quick answer to the question about the Heifetz model was that it's a model around adaptive leadership. I was looking at adaptability in general, so I didn't specifically pull on that model into the framework, but it's a really good call out as I look at developing leaders kind of in the next testing of the framework. I'll certainly be reviewing that in a bit more detail. So thank you for that person with the nudge, and send more nudges my way. I'm always certainly have to look at them. There was that question about the link to the thinking preferences, and I think we might have covered this in our discussion, but I think what I found was that I had to use all the different quadrants of thinking to be more adaptable, is my very short answer. You need to, and it's building on what you shared with us, Rosie, that all the quadrants contribute to us being adaptable, and just moving between the quadrants is an act of being adaptable, if that makes sense. So I was probably situationally aware, where I was going, what thinking preference is going to show up best as I do this new experience. So I was kind of mindful of it as I did it, a little bit in the background. Those, I think I've hit two of the questions. Can you help me out? Did I have a further question to answer?
That was it. Awesome. You did.
Oh.
You answered them. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, let's wrap up. So of course, I wanted to summarize this in a whole brain way. And so you could take this forward and really use it as a framework to think about in your context. And I think there's been some great conversations happening in the breakout rooms that around context and what's happening in your space. So I start in the red quadrant with, a person, someone who I see as an adaptive leader. And there are many, many examples out there to choose from. This was just one. And really, the adaptability came from like the context, obviously, post-apartheid South Africa, and changing the mindset from retribution to reconciliation, and looking at how as society needed to change. I think one of the groups asked, this is all good one-on-one, but how do you do it as a whole organization? Well, Nelson Mandela did it with a whole society, shifting the dial. It didn't fix it like that. It wasn't instantaneous, but it is a shifting of the dial. It is a re-establishing of the values and the culture underpinning which we operate, doing so in a safe way, doing so in a non-judgmental way, in a non-exclusive way, not an us and them conversation. So there are a lot of themes that come out of that, and I'm super keen to hear where Cathy's work gets to further, because I think that's going to come out in those conversations, and it already has. So think about the who. Then think about an analogy. So I liked this one of all the ones that AI came up with. I asked AI, I was like, okay, this is everything that I've been learning and researching. What do you think the best analogy is? And it came up with a couple, and I took this one. So adaptive leadership, think of it like guiding a raft through the whitewater rapids. The river is the environment, fast changing, unpredictable, lots of rocks and currents. The rapids are the adaptive challenges themselves, the problems, no clear solutions. You need teamwork, you need learning, you need responsiveness. The guide is the leader at the back. So not someone who steers from the front with this brute force, but they are reading the water, mobilizing the team, adjusting to the situation and the currents, and hopefully keeping you afloat. Especially if it's me, because I'd be pretty nervous if I was falling out of that boat. The paddlers, the people, the teams that make up this environment, this context, whatever it is that you're trying to work through, they all contribute in different ways. They work together, they bring individual strengths and challenges, and they want to be on the raft. They want to be there with you. So that's another probably conversation to have. Do you even want to be on the raft? Sometimes you need to have that conversation as well. And then when you're going through the whitewater rapids of New Zealand, and I bring this up because you guys are mostly Kiwis, and this is one of those cool fun things to do when Aussies come to visit. It's like, do the rapids. There is moments of calm. So it's not a constant river the whole time. You get through a rapid, you pause, you calm, you reassess, you take a breath, and you look back, you learn, you move and prepare for the next part. So I think adaptive leadership is a nice way to look at through this analogy. And you can't change the river, you can't fix the river, but you can navigate it differently, you can think about it differently, you can develop skills. Back to Cathy's point, it's actually coming up in the next slide. So next part, sorry. So adaptive leadership is the act of mobilizing the people, tackle the tough challenges, thriving change, especially when you don't know what the outcome is. It's unpredictable. It's the unpredictability of the environment. And sorry, this is where the framework comes in. So with Cathy's evolving framework, we can link the framework and the capabilities to thinking preferences and the whole brain thinking model. And I think when we do that, what we get is a really powerful way to support people through change, and to support people in ways that they can connect to the context that they are facing. So that is my wrap up. I'm just got to go to the last slide, which I'm right on time. I don't want to go to 10:31. This brings us to the end of our session. Please feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn and email. Andrea's email is also on the screen. If you'd like to take this conversation further, there is much more we could share, we can talk to. Please send Andrea an email. Otherwise, connect with Cathy, myself, or Andrea on LinkedIn. And we really look forward to hearing how you play this out in your context, how you take some of these key tips and insights and transform them in your world. So thank you for today. I'm going to stop sharing my slides and come off mute because I have another meeting to go to right this second. I wish you all the best for the rest of your week.